The Colts made some eye-opening moves at the roster cut deadline today. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can get $5, put in a $5 bet and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. What's up, y'all? This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of HorseshoeHuddle.com. I am your boots on the ground credentialed media member, and Zach is the grindiest film guy out there. And today is roster cut deadline day. The Colts went from 91 players down to 53 just under an hour ago. They made us all wait, made us all sweat. But we're here to break down kind of the biggest moves of the day, the biggest guys who stayed on, who are maybe on the bubble, biggest cuts, guys who are probably going to get on the practice squad, and then some players who were let go from other teams around the league that make a lot of sense for the Colts to bring in. So let's go over a couple of the injury ones real quick, Zach. So Samson Ebukam placed on IR but designated to return. So that one is pretty interesting because obviously an Achilles injury that is normally, like a year-long recovery. But we've, in recent years, it seems like that's something that the timelines are becoming a little shorter, or guys are trying to come back from it a little quicker. Cameron McGrone also put on IR, designated to return. Not a huge move, but it's a guy that played 150 special team snaps for you last year. So someone who's quite involved on those units. Jelani Woods. So we were thinking maybe he was going to be designated to return as well. Had the procedure for his turf toe. They said it was going to be out until about Christmas, which it's like, okay, maybe you bring him back for a late playoff push, or if you make the playoffs, you got him for the playoffs. But no, done for the year, second year in a row. So that is significant because you were already kind of moving forward, more used to life without him than life with him. And he was just going to be a nice cherry on top. And now you don't even have that. So that's kind of one of the bigger disappointments. What else stood out to you today, whether it's a bigger name that got let go or someone significant that's still on the roster?
Well, the most disappointing thing, and I think people are saying it in the comment section here, is we got all led to believe that Jason Bean was making the roster. A Kansas guy was tweeting out that Jason Bean, according to his sources, had made the roster, and now it doesn't look like Jason Bean made the roster, which, you know what, if I didn't get led to believe he made the roster, I would have been fine with this, because I was always saying that he was going to be a good practice squad quarterback for the Colts. But no, the one that really shocked me was the Jelani Woods decision to put him on IR season ending, because I think you and I had specifically were like reserving a spot on our roster breakdowns for him to be on that IR-DR, the IR designated to return. And like Ebukam, it makes sense because they didn't put him on anything throughout the offseason. So it would have made sense for them to be waiting that out. But here's my thing at the end of the day. They valued the potential of maybe getting Samson Ebukam back, which is not a guarantee, over probably getting Jelani Woods back in December. I'm not saying that means Jelani Woods is done for good in Indy, but I feel like that's kind of telling, Or if you even want to be more crazy with it, they valued getting back a 6-string linebacker who's on special teams after a couple months, then maybe getting Jelani Woods back in December. So yeah, I don't know what the future holds for Jelani Woods in Indy. I don't think it's looking good. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you that. If you're listening to this show, you can probably already assume that as well. But yeah, I don't think the future is looking great for Jelani Woods in Indy, and this might be his last kind of training camp with the Colts. I'm not too sure. It's really unfortunate. Injuries happen, injuries suck, but it's part of the game. And 2 years in a row where you're not playing any meaningful football is just tough to overcome right there.
Yeah, he felt like this kind of secret wild card that the Colts had to play if he was going to be healthy and take a little, some subtle steps forward this summer. But that didn't develop, and then of course he gets injured. Let's go over some of these other big names. Obviously, Ronnie Harrison getting cut over the weekend. That depletes the Colts' safety depth. It's not like a shocking move, but it's one that a lot of people thought he probably ought to be on there just because the depth in general was pretty lacking. Evan Hull. So it looks like it's just Tyler Goodson behind Trey Sermon. For one, that shows Trey Sermon is probably going to be back soon. I know Shane yesterday I think it was, said they hope to get him back next week. So you got Tyler Goodson there behind him. We talked recently that running back is kind of a position they always seem to add to this time of year during roster cuts. Eric Johnson, a couple years ago, 5th-round pick. That's a guy that's really quite never done much for you. He never, took those steps forward. And at one point, they were kind of saying we would love for him to be our next success story like Grover Stewart. And it just never really got there. So pretty unfortunate. Corner, very eye-raising for me. You let go of Chris Lamons, which to me was like, okay, cool. Micah Abraham won. Nope. Micah Abraham and Jalen Simpson both gone. So right now the Colts are just rolling with 5 corners. Kenny, obviously, Juju, Jalen Jones, Dallas Flowers, and Darrell Baker Jr. Now, obviously, at least one of those two guys is going to make it to the practice squad. But pretty surprising for some thin positions. And then someone who made it, which is good, Dalton Tucker, undrafted free agent, interior offensive lineman. That's a guy we've been saying recently we really hope makes it, and lo and behold, he does. So did Danny Pinter. It so far wasn't a battle of either or. Both of them made it. So we'll see which of these guys aren't actually truly safe once the waiver pickups come through. But for now, those are probably the biggest needle movers among the 53-man roster.
Yeah, I mean, just to talk about the 53-man roster, like we can celebrate Dalton Tucker making it, which I absolutely am. I love Dalton Tucker making this roster. I've been pounding the table for Dalton Tucker, obviously, a lot these last couple of weeks. But realistically, when the Colts make waiver claims or when they sign a veteran, he might be the 53rd man on this roster who gets the boot the second that one of those guys are grabbed. Now, there are other guys who I think could be that 53rd man. You could look at like a Rodney Thomas maybe. Darrell Baker Jr. could be it. They go after some corners. We'll see. The rosters are very, very fluid, and Dalton Tucker is not in a spot that's really like safe for him. But as of right now, the Colts can start a new undrafted free agent streak with Dalton Tucker making the initial 53-man roster. So really cool to see from him. Outside of that, nothing really too shocking. Like Evan Hull, I thought they were going to keep 4, but not too crazy. If they're going with 3, I think Hull's going to make it to the practice squad as well. So I'm not too concerned there. Eric Johnson, it really was just time to move on at this point. Like it just wasn't going to happen. And then that cornerback, I know, this is probably the most shocking was corner with Lamons, Abraham, and Simpson. And for me personally, I wouldn't have cut Simpson just because that ability to turn and run is just so rare in this cornerback room. They have a lot of slow guys at corner right now. And Simpson's really the only guy who can turn and run. But when you look at those 3 guys, none of them really play special teams. Lamons is your backup nickel, but you can probably get him on the practice squad as a veteran on the practice squad and be able to call him up like they did Tony Brown for the first month of the season. And then once injuries happen, you can make him an official roster guy. So he's going to be in Indy next year. And then Abraham and Simpson, like you might lose Simpson on the waiver wire because of that speed, and a team might value him as a safety, but I think both have a decent chance of making it to the practice squad. Again, I probably wouldn't have exposed Simpson to it, but I think it's like 50-50 for him getting to the practice squad. Abraham should be able to make it there. So overall, nothing too crazy here with the cuts. I'm not like they didn't make like a massive, like the John Simon cut years ago, I think going into 2018, where we all freaked out about that one. I don't think there's any big crazy one this year compared to like that one in the past. Like a lot of these moves made sense. Dalton Tucker making it is good. Isaiah Land making it really good. Adetomiwa Adebore obviously was going to make it. A lot of good players that deserve to make it made the team. And we'll see what happens. There's a couple ways they could improve this roster. Like corner, They could go after a fourth running back. They could, exploit some practice squad stuff for those things. So yeah, we'll see what the Colts do these next couple days.
Yeah, nothing they did today has me saying, what are you doing? It's more so, all right, well, we know which positions you really need to focus on with the waiver wire. And then part of the waiver wire is going to be bringing guys onto the practice squad, whether they're from the outside. Hopefully a lot of these guys that were decent young players, but just didn't quite make it because of a numbers game. But coming up next, we're going to talk about the potential practice squad. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel lately. It's America's #1 sports book. Well, we got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So Colts and Texans at home, Lucas Oil Stadium, week 1. Colts currently 1.5-point dogs at home. It's the reigning AFC South champions. There's been a lot of beacon leading up to this one. But the point over-under is at 48.5 points. So that kind of looks like it could be a fun little shootout, perhaps. Entertaining at the very least. So go ahead and place your bets on that. We're already just a couple weeks away. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook.
And thank you all for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. For your second listen, though, enjoy Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I just finished my fantasy draft the other night, my first of many fantasy drafts. I know some of you guys out there have 30 leagues, so get ready for all 30 of your fantasy leagues with Locked On Fantasy Football. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Jake. So we're looking at potential guys that can make it to the Colts practice squad. And certainly there's guys around the league that will fill out this practice squad. Like not every guy the Colts cut is going to make it down to the practice squad. But the guys who really stand out, obviously, are your players like Jalen Simpson, Micah Abraham, Jonah Luwalu, the 3 guys that they cut from this past draft class. And then a player like Jason Bean, I think, is the practice squad quarterback. Makes a ton of sense as well. But there's some other guys too. I know you have a couple other guys here. Who really stands out to you, Jake, as making the practice squad?
Yeah, for sure. And I believe it's still 16 people can be on the practice squad. And there's exemptions now for like veterans who've been in the league 100 years. They can even be there as well.
Yeah, I think it's 6 guys who are veterans who are vested vets can be on the practice squad. I believe it's 6. So
that
like Chris
right.
Lamons, Ronnie Harrison. Like those guys make a ton of sense or Jannard Avery could be a practice squad guy as vested vet. So those guys make a ton of sense for the practice squad as well.
Yeah, for sure. With Lamons, it feels a lot like the Tony Brown situation from a year ago, other than we thought Abraham and either of Abraham or Simpson would make it. But I can imagine, Lamons, Harrison, Hull, Abraham, and Simpson being on there. And then you look further down the list, obviously Jason Bean. I would have said Xavier Scott, but now with Evan Hull not making it, Jake Witt, they knew he was going to take a few years to get ready. Last year, he had the hip injury that kept him out the whole time. So Witt is a pretty easy layup there. Avery is a guy who he's not a star or even really a stud, but when he was out there in those reps during the developmental period, you could tell he was better and further along than the guys trying to block him. So if they want to keep a guy for a pass rusher for depth just in their back pocket, I think that makes sense. Levi Bell, I heard talk about him being on there. Sure. Laulu, of course. Ajaki is a guy that I really became fond of throughout the preseason. Liam Anderson is someone that there was talk about him coming back. Amir Speed as well. Really big corner, really athletic guy. Makes all the sense of the world. And then Marcel Dabo, they still get the international player pathway exception for him. So they can really bring him back without any penalty. It's just if they like him enough to continue developing him.
Yeah, I mean, it's year 3 now for him. So if you already invested this much in the guy, like you might as well just keep going at this point. A couple other guys who stand out who I don't think are on our list because they got announced last second when the Colts released their roster, but like a Titus Leo who was drafted last year as well. So he kind of falls in that Jake Witt category of player. You could look at Titus Leo. You could look at DJ Montgomery. We've talked about all summer as being a prime practice squad guy where if anyone goes down who's an actual contributor in the wide receiver room, Montgomery is a guy who can play all those starting spots, who gave them some good snaps last year. And they really like him. Like, he got some first team reps in camp at times too. So we didn't think he was going to beat out Ashton Dulin, because Dulin just does so much on special teams. But I do think he has a good chance there. So again, kind of the guys we expect to make it to the practice squad. I am wondering what position, if any, this year they use the practice squad to kind of exploit, like they did last year with like wide receiver, like exploit kind of the rules a little bit. Like, could they use
the constant churning? Is that what you mean?
Right. Like the sixth corner, maybe. Like, you put Amir Speed and Chris Lamons on your practice squad, and you use your 4 call-ups on both of those guys through the first 2 months of the season, and whoever you call up is your gunner that week. For Speed or Lamons, that could make a ton of sense. And that way, because like as of right now, they don't have another gunner on the roster aside from Ashton Dulin. Unless you're putting Darrell Baker Jr. out there, who didn't really rep at it. Like, their typical gunners in camp were what, Speed and Lamons.
They did go through a lot. I have it in my notes, but just about anyone you would expect got reps. A lot of the depth receivers and corners. So you lose a lot of it with like Laquan Treadwell, Tyree Cleveland, guys like that. But Montgomery, like you mentioned, I would imagine he's going to make it, and he could be a guy you keep calling up and use until you can't. Baker, I think, would be in the mix. Dallas Flowers, since he's not going to be starting. I think Baker and Flowers, since they're not going to be starting on defense, really makes sense to throw in there in the mold.
Yeah, they could if the Colts don't want to call up anyone. But if they have that practice squad call up, then you can get a guy like Amir Speed up, who, like, that's his bread and butter. Like, that's what he does. He's just a gunner. Like, he's not a corner in the NFL. He's a gunner. That's all he is. So it makes a lot of sense there. You could also do it with the 4th running back until Sermon's fully healthy. Evan Hull is off the roster for right now, but you could get him on the practice squad and just call him up, each week until Sermon's 100%. Or Xavier Scott you call up if Evan Hull doesn't make it. Like, whatever. There are some ways that you can kind of exploit the practice squad a little bit and use it as like an extra area to add depth to your team.
Yeah, like you mentioned, receivers, when they did that a lot last year, and I could see it again. I mean, Juwan Winfrey was a guy that got, I feel like, ping-ponged constantly. But, Laquan Treadwell makes sense if you want to bring him on there. Obviously, Montgomery, Winfrey's on IR now. But I think receiver makes a lot of sense. We said it was one of the deeper position groups, and I think that still stands, even with the guys that didn't make it. The 6 guys who we said were going to make it are their 6 receivers. And that really goes to show you how much better they feel this group is. Last year, they came out of this with 3 receivers. Now they have 6. And then another few guys who they probably would have entertained making the roster.
Yeah, you definitely feel good about wide receiver right now. Dulin coming back from injury, Gould coming in, A.D. Mitchell coming in. You feel much better about wide receiver this year than you did last year. I think there's a lot of positions you feel better about this year than you did this time last year. I mean, defensive tackle, just having Raekwon Davis in a second-year jump from Adetomiwa Adebore. Now, Taven Bryan's still there. We have to devote time on this podcast to Taven Bryan every day. So Taven Bryan is still there for now. Maybe they grab a 380-pound dude to replace him. I'd be happy with that, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But you feel better about that. You feel good about edge rusher with Isaiah Land taking a presumable second-year jump and then getting Laiatu Latu in there. Tyquan Lewis is really healthy. Like, they're doing really good there at edge. Really, the big question mark is kind of corner. At corner, how good do the Colts feel about corner right now? Do they go out and grab some of these veterans that got released, or grab a dude on waivers, or do they just roll with those 5 guys and see what happens? Because we know at corner right now, I mean, Kenny's missed time in the past. Juju Brents has missed a lot of time in his short NFL career. Dallas Flowers has missed a lot of time. How comfortable do you feel about the corners and only keeping 5 when you have a couple guys who have dealt with injuries in their career, or even safety? That's like, how much do you trust Ronnie Thomas to be the only backup to both safeties? Because Trevor Denbo's a special teamer. So those kind of look like the spots where the Colts could address in the next couple of days. But we'll see if they actually do any moves or do any changes to those spots.
Well said. I mean, it seems like the guys at corner that they kept were the most banged up dudes that they could have possibly gone with. But that leads us beautifully into the final segment, which is going to be guys around the league who were cut, who we think make a little bit of sense for the Colts. All right, Zach, we got a nice little list here. Of course, the biggest names are always going to be, who everyone wants to point to. And we do have some pretty recognizable guys on here. Desmond King from the Texans. That's a guy, tons of special teams ability, nickel ability, safety ability. Donald Parham, tight end from the Chargers. I think that dude's like 6'7". He is another tree if they want to have one there. Let's see. Lewis Sin from the Vikings. Now, I believe he was waived, right?
Yes. So
okay.
Players under 4 years of experience in the NFL get waived. I believe he qualifies as being waived because he's still in his rookie contract.
Yes.
That was the only one I had a question about. But Lewis Sin, I think he's waived. But
sure.
Donald Parham is a vested vet. He's been in the NFL for a while at this point. He's cut. Desmond King, I put him on this list because of his ties with Gus Bradley back in his good years with the Chargers. The Colts could use a backup nickel on the roster at this point who could maybe play some safety too, a little bit there.
I mean, they say we know Julian can do it, but again, that's a guy who you desperately need him to stay at safety. They say Nick Cross can do it, but we've barely seen it. So they really need a backup nickel.
Well, they only have 2 playable safeties, so you don't want one of your 2 playable safeties to be the backup nickel, because then look, I know I sound very out on Rodney Thomas when I talk this way, but Rodney Thomas at best is like a below average free safety. So even if you are moving one of those guys to backup nickel, you have to have Thomas at free safety. It exposes what you can do rotation wise pre-snap. So I'd much rather just have an actual backup nickel. And again, they might have Lamons on the practice squad to kind of exploit that a little bit, but Desmond King has the potential to be more of an upgrade there. Donald Parham is more, I kind of grabbed him as more of a vested vet you signed to the practice squad because he has ties to Shane Steichen as well. Nick Needham, I think, is a really interesting name. Had a really productive early stint with the Miami Dolphins. Hasn't really panned out the last couple years, but just an experienced corner who's had some good play. I think Needham was one of those guys, I want to say when the Colts were playing the Dolphins a couple years ago, had a couple picks against the Colts too. Really solid player. So we'll see. That's an experienced name getting out there, and then some younger guys. And then I'll let you go to if you had other names that you want to throw out here, Jake. Safety Mark Perry from the Dolphins. He got waived, an undrafted free agent. The Colts really liked him this past draft. If you just want to get a young guy back there who can play special teams alongside Denbo, you could grab him. And then Eric Garror, I think it's how you say his last name, Garror, slot corner from the Titans. He was waived. I think he was an undrafted free agent last year. Played some good snaps for the Titans last year. Not the best player by any means, but just an experienced young slot corner who has some size to him. Could be an interesting name. But those were the guys who really stood out to me. I'm sure there's a lot of other vested vets and waived guys that make some sense. And I got to go through the list of 700 players and see, which 2 guys the Colts might put request in come tomorrow.
Yeah. So I guess before I get much further, the Colts and everybody have got to put in their waiver claims by noon tomorrow, Wednesday. Those waiver claims will be rewarded at 4 Eastern. And the Colts are currently 15th in the pecking order. So literally they're probably only going to get the guys that not many others want. And it's important to add, I mean, you hear the trope, these guys got cut for a reason, and that's true. At some point, a lot of these guys will have been called trash by their home, fans. This guy's trash, you don't need him, blah, blah, blah. Sure. But this is all about finding guys who have a little niche that what can you do for me? Whether it's special teams, insurance on, the practice squad, or just someone where you desperately need the smallest hole to fill. That's what some of these guys are for. Some of them that I came up with. Now, some of these are just guys that I remember really liking coming out of the draft. And a lot of them are defensive backs who just have a pulse and have played before, which is kind of what you need at this point. The Colts do. So at corner, I've got Amani Oruwariye. Really liked him with the Lions coming out of Penn State. Kelvin Joseph was a high potential guy coming out of Kentucky, and I believe he went to the Texans and then the Cowboys. Now,
reverse that. I think it was Cowboys, and then whoever has him now just waived him, but he was drafted by the Cowboys, I believe.
Chiefs.
Oh, so I think it was Cowboys, then traded someone, and then Chiefs, because the Chiefs always give a guy their last chance before they're out of the NFL.
Yeah. So when I was looking it up beforehand, I think it was the Chiefs. That was apparently a shocking move that they cut Joseph. So a guy with potential. I believe we thought Eberflus would really like him when he was coming out. Am I even thinking on the right timeline?
So I liked Kelvin Joseph as a prospect until I heard about some of the behavioral things.
I trust you on that. I'm out on that. Then.
And then I backed off, and then the Cowboys were like, "No, we love him." And then he was
Cowboys and Chiefs love the meaner and worse you are, they love it.
Yeah, he was a gunner for a couple of years there for the Cowboys, and then I think he might have got traded to the Dolphins for that other bust corner. I don't know. I can't keep track of corners that don't make it in the NFL.
The Dolphins have had a lot of them. And then I got a couple safeties. Again, these are probably going to be names that make some guys cringe, but they are alive and have played in the NFL. Terrell Edmonds and Adrian Amos.
Amos, I'm not super big on, but Edmonds, like, he can run the alley a little bit, play some strong. He's a decent athlete. So, like,
yeah, you got a backup free there and a backup strong. These aren't guys I would necessarily start, but if something you can't afford an injury to anybody at safety right now, or really corner either. Like the Colts, who are hurt all the time, can afford 0 injuries in their secondary.
Yes.
And their secondaries hurt a lot. So they're going to have to pull new guys in.
Yeah, I do think they need to make some waiver claims at corner or safety. But honestly, when we look at Chris Ballard's past, where does he make waiver claims? It's typically on the O-line and D-line. And I
think tight end and running back too.
Yeah. But I think he likes his O-line and D-line this year. I don't think it's really a waiver claim spot for him. But
those were 2 spots. Yeah, I did not I thought they would be fine almost no matter what they did on O-line, D-line. It's good to finally feel that way.
Yeah, of the 20 guys they kept on the O-line and D-line combined, I'm really good with 19 of them being there. So, like, I can't complain whatsoever right now about the O-line, D-line.
Who's the outlier?
I have no clue. You guys can fill that one in there so they get home. But I do think, I did want to add to your point when you mentioned waiver wire guys a couple minutes ago, because a lot of these guys don't really pan out. Like, they are guys who make the bottom of the roster now, and then when you make other moves later in the season, they're off the team. So for every Josh Sills or whoever that tackle was they claimed last year, I think it was like Ryan Hayes was his name.
That is his name.
As the name, out of Michigan, and guys like that. But you have guys like that who are here and then gone. It doesn't really matter. But for every one of those guys, you get an Isaiah Land who sticks around for a whole year, and it wasn't even a question he was making this roster. You have the Al-Qadim Mohammeds who are never leaving, ever. Like that, we're always terrified they're going to be back, actually, when it comes to the Colts.
Schefter even accidentally reported that he went back to the Colts, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. Turns out it was the Cowboys. But
Yep, and then the other one you have is the Kenny Moores. The ones who somehow work out and become stars for your team. So when the waiver wire guys get announced tomorrow, which I'm assuming the Colts will grab either 1 or 2, maybe 3, but probably like 1 or 2 guys like they usually do. It could mean nothing, but it could be something. Is all I'm really saying here. Like I wouldn't count the guy out completely, just because he's a waiver claim on the wire or anything like that. But we'll see what happens here with waiver wires. We do think that safety and corner is the way to go, but knowing Chris Ballard, it could be a running back. It could be a tight end. It could be, I don't know, a linebacker. They only have 5. He loves to keep like 10 of those typically. So could be a linebacker, but we'll see what happens there. Jake, do you have anything else to add before we jump out of here today? I want to shout out all you guys for being here today. This is one of the biggest live streams we've ever had. Like, you guys are awesome.
just off the cuff. Yeah. So, I mean, we still have the rest of this week to go, but this month has been our biggest month ever in the 2+ years now that Zach and I have been with Locked On. So thank you guys very much for that. You've bunch of you in the live stream right now, so that goes to reflect. Thank you for trusting us to bring you our opinions and our analysis of what's going on. So very much appreciate that, guys.
Yeah, more coming obviously this season, so make sure you're tuning in to Locked On Colts. And we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. Now go listen to Locked On Fantasy Football podcast for your second listen. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategy so you can win your league this season. And if you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that inside scoop, follow the link in our show notes. If you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. We're also on TikTok and Instagram. Make sure you're following us there at Locked On Colts over there. And also subscribe to us on YouTube or list your podcast. We love your guys' ratings and reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.